to Bold Agendas, the podcast where we explore topics of strategic interest to business leaders who are guiding their organizations through transformative change. Today's conversation is about industrial transformation, not as a buzzword, but as an operational necessity. Across manufacturing, energy, utilities, and other asset-intensive industries, leaders are facing a convergence of pressure. Aging infrastructure, growing system complexity, fragile supply chains, and a workforce that's changing faster than operating models were designed to handle. My guest today has spent decades working inside this reality, not as a theorist, but as a builder. Pieter van Schalkwyk is the CEO and founder of XMPRO, a company focused on agentic AI for industrial operations. He's the author of Building Industrial Digital Twins and a long-standing leader in the Digital Twin Consortium. Pieter has written extensively about why incremental digitalization isn't enough and why industrial organizations need fundamentally different decision and operating models to remain competitive. In December, he also co-wrote a widely shared and interesting reflection with Michael Carroll entitled An Obituary for 2025, the year we buried the co-pilot dream. We'll come to that at the end of the discussion as a way to synthesize what this moment has clarified. I'm Mimi Brooks, and this is Bold Agendas on reinventing industrial operations, digital twins, agentic intelligence, and what 2025 clarified. Let's get started. Pieter, welcome to Bold Agendas, and thank you so much for squeezing me in right before the holidays and during your trek here to the U.S. So I appreciate your time. It's really delightful to have you with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
You know, Pieter, I was saying before we got live that there was so many different opportunities, I think, to talk to you about, a range of interests and topics and thought leadership that you cover. Our audience, as you probably know, is a very operations-centric leadership team, generally speaking. So you're really very much in the sweet spot of a lot of the industries that our listeners are involved in. So I think that they'll be so totally interested in your point of view. And I think the context is going to be highly relevant. So I'm excited to have you here. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in and try to get as much thought from you as I can in the hour that I have you. Sound good?
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep. All good.
So Pieter, there's just a lot of points of view, I think, that you have around, the changing operating model in industry. And I'm really interested in spending a bit of time talking about, this concept of why industrial operations needs reinvention as opposed to incremental fixes, and get your thinking about, what that reinvention, really needs to look like. So maybe as a going in point, we can start with what's causing this, Pieter? Like, what are the triggering events, that are converging now that's creating this, perspective of yours around the need for reinvention?
Yeah, I think it's a important question to answer before we get to, before we get to answers, we need to first make sure that we've got the right question that we targeting. So, what we've seen with manufacturing and sort of industrials in a broader perspective, and specifically on the operations side, so those who make things, who move them around, and get them sort of in your hands. There's been three massive shifts that we've seen over the last couple of years, and there's some stats from various research organizations showing that the average tenure of an employee in 2019 was 20 years in manufacturing, and this is US labor statistics. Now it is 3 years. The average 90-day retention rate of a new hire, meaning the person that you hire, in the first 90 days, they will stay for 50% of the time. So half the people that you hire will leave within the first 90 days. These are all frightening statistics. And then we also have the retiring workforce. So it's not just a challenge of retaining the ones that we have, which again, if you look at manufacturing, you look at mining, you look at oil and gas, those kind of industries, no one really wants to work in that anymore. They're not clean industries. There's a negative connotation with them. It's hard labor in some instances. So we're definitely seeing a shift in the workforce, which has been a massive impact. And again, the retiring workforce is one element, but the other part of it is that the training that we have for employees actually don't keep up with the pace of technology, which is the second challenge that we have, which is really the complexity. We've seen systems getting so much more complex. 30, 40 years ago, you would operate a manufacturing plant and there would be machines where you could turn knobs and dials and things like that. Now it's all buttons that you press. Operators used to have 60 alarms in a control room. Now they have, on a shift, now they have 1,000. So the complexity of systems have got really, really overwhelming, and the cognitive load and cognitive burden on those remaining people, as you know, they knew they don't have the skills. The experienced people retire, and now we're putting more cognitive burden on them. And the other thing that we've seen is there's a pressure on all these organizations to do more with less. We have to reduce energy, we have to improve our carbon footprint, our budgets are being cut. So there's the combination of these three things are leading to a world where we can't operate with the operating model that we had, the business processes that we had, the level of simple automation, if I can call it that we had before. All of these, and this has happened in the last 10 years, and for a lot of people it wasn't that obvious until sort of in the last 3-4 years. There's really a big challenge, and what we've seen with COVID, a compression of the skills challenge as well. So a lot of people left the job market, and now we're seeing that gap being accentuated quite a lot. So we do have to find another way, because every single thing that you touch, I think there's some statistics saying more than 80% of anything physical comes out of a mine in some way, shape, or form. So the chair that you sit on, the desk that you work on, the phone that you have in your hand, all the raw materials and everything from that comes from a physical process. First of all, from a mine, and then it's manufactured and moved into, and it needs energy, it needs the not just the human input, but actually all the other equipment and everything that goes with it. So that whole ecosystem is really important for us to continue in a sustainable way. And right now, the operating models that we have for those actually don't support that.
Peter, I think that the context that you're suggesting is so important, because nothing that you said is really a technology-driven response at all, right? So we're not talking about, eliminating human workers as the challenge. We're not talking about automation versus augmentation. It's really, truly, in the genesis of the sustainability idea for the business. What's the context of sustainability here, given all of these factors? And the factors haven't even compounded the issue of technology that might be, an advantage here or not, right?
Yeah. I think technology is a solvable problem. So if we look at there's a famous framework called the Sinafin framework, which is about, things are either simplex. Simplex. They're either simple, they are complicated, they're complex, or they are it's a state of chaos. When we look at the technology aspects, and whether, even if it's with generative AI and all of that, those are complicated problems. Those are solvable. It may just require a lot of effort. The environment that we're moving into, with the challenges that I mentioned earlier, that's a really complex situation, because nothing that we've done in the past, there's no manual for it. We've not done this in the past, so we don't know what it looks like. And if we're not careful, that may turn into kind of a chaotic situation. If you look at an example of a chaotic system is something like stock market. You cannot predict it, or you actually don't know what's going to come next. Complex is like raising your kids. The fact that you got one kid through school doesn't mean you're going to get the other one through school. Where a complicated system is something which has just got lots of parts, and that's the technology aspect. Now, I think there's a lot of focus on the technology, and is the technology going to replace the people who do the work? I see that quite often, and my honest view, not, but we'll probably get to that a little bit later. I think there's going to be more abundance, there's more work, there are more roles. It may not be the same roles, but that's all the result of the change that we have to go through as an organization. Implementing technology is just one aspect. We've got people, process, and technology. And I think the challenge really is in that order. The challenge is people, and then our processes, and then the technology. So we don't start with the technology as the solution, but with how do we deal with the people in the system, and then the processes. And the processes are not necessarily simple linear processes like we had. If you think of like how do you measure productivity in processes, and those are all new questions that we have to ask, which we didn't have to do before.
Peter, just staying on the current state for just a minute longer, do you think that, we've created a complex environment, in the last, let's say, a more complex environment in the last few years, that has resulted in almost this idea where, people end up being the glue, like the point of rationalization in our business systems, in our business ecosystems, because the systems that we've stood up and built haven't been able to really deliver, kind of a seamlessness impact, if you will, in terms of people. So, the complexity is all the things that you cited in the environment. And then I wonder also if we've added a big dose of environmental complexity on top of it, where a few people understand how the quote unquote system really works, the system together, not the systems apart, the system together. And that's stressing, a lot of the, capabilities of a handful of people that know how it really works, not how people think it works. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think the complexity, as I mentioned earlier, we've built really complex systems, but what we tried to do was improve, and there's this notion of mechanical horse fallacy where, when cars came out, we thought, okay, can we build mechanical horses rather than cars? So we were trying to take what we know and improve that to a level of complexity where hopefully it was addressing something that we saw as the next solution, until you realize the problem is actually very different. So from a complexity point of view, the cognitive load that we're putting on people one of the areas that we work in is digital twins, because we think it's a key element of this industrial part. But putting another screen with another digital twin for someone to make another decision, and that person is already overloaded, that person is already the only person you can ask, because we've not institutionalized the knowledge, we've not democratized it, we've not put it in the hands we've not created that IP artifact inside the business that contains that information. It still sits with people. And because the systems are now harder to use, the systems are more complex to use, those few people who actually know what you do, as you say, they're more in demand. But it also creates a huge point of fragility in the system, because the decisions now still lie with people, the ultimate decision. And I think that's where a lot of the latency and things still come in. We've built things that can automate certain of our processes really fast, but then we still put a human in the loop to actually now slow the process down. And if that person is not is not the right one on the shift or the right person in the office to make a decision, then we don't even always get the optimal decision by introducing all this complexity. But as I said, if you're going to a control room of a large manufacturer, water utilities, energy utilities, oil and gas plants, where you've got an operator sitting in a control room, they go from a couple of years ago, 60 alarms a day to literally 1,000 alarms a day. And you're expecting humans to do that. So the complexity creates fragility. And it's not just complexity, it is those complicated systems that we started putting together because they've got just more bolts on, more things. And we're trying to build a bigger Frankenmonster of the thing that we had in the first place.
So, Pieter, do you think at this stage of the game that leaders generally accept and believe that the operating model won't scale? Are we on the decisioning side of what do we do next? Or do you think we're still on the awareness side of the problem?
I get the opportunity to speak to leaders in large elite organizations who are absolutely leaders in their space. I think they recognize some of this. If you go to another tier of leadership, they absolutely don't recognize it. There's a little bit of a head in the sand situation because it is such a challenging situation and there's no obvious answer to, like the complexity, people retiring, putting out fires every day. You don't get time to understand, chopping down trees in the forest. You're not looking, am I in the right forest? So we see still quite a bit of that. But talking to elite operators, the ones who are absolutely leaders in or best in class in their organizations, they recognize it. They are actively looking for ways of how to address it. But I still think from a leadership perspective, we don't really understand the impact of what is happening around us with all the changes and also the competitive environment and the ability of people to adapt. So that combination, I think there's an awareness, but I don't think there's an understanding at this stage.
Do you think that people that are aware, even, Pieter, do you think that they think that there's more time for them to solve this? Do they have the time scale wrong, do you think?
Absolutely. And I think on a previous podcast, you had Mike Carroll on, who said if you don't, if you're not looking at this, your assets will have someone else's name on in the next 5 years. I don't think people realize the timescales we are talking about.
Yeah.
And if you're also looking at what is happening in the space where we're replacing some of this work and some of these tasks with generative capability, automation, or autonomous capability rather than automation, I think that's actually moving a lot faster than what most people realize.
So, one last condition that I'll throw out, and then I'll try to move us into some of the solution space. The thing that I see often, Pieter, wondering if you see it in your consulting work and just your advisory work, is in addition to the people problem, I think that we have a real problem of knowledgeable people to manage the resources that we've designed and built. I mean, literally a handful of people that are left that understand how some of these big legacy systems really work, such that carving into them in any way to try to create a transition from the current to the future state is really challenging relative to understanding how our current mega assets work that are some of the building blocks, albeit unstable, but still some of the building blocks of the current state. Do you see that, Pieter, in your work as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have the privilege of working with some of the world's largest mining companies. Number one mining company is is looking at exactly that problem of there's a handful of people that have experience on the actual performance, because the challenge that you sit with these industrial big machines is that they are mechanical machines. So and people who've worked on those, who worked with them over a long period of time, understand some of the mechanical behaviors and how things fit together. And if you look at this, it means that that context and that understanding is very hard to capture, and it's even harder to capture while you are trying to do the work as well. So I can't take a group of people out and say, you're now going to sit in a corner and you're going to capture all this knowledge and we're going to build this thing where we have this massive knowledge base, because I need those people to actually operate my plant, to actually operate the machines. So, and their motivation to actually do that, there's very little motivation with all the negative press and things that we're seeing around some of these technologies taking jobs away. So it creates a compounding problem of having those few resources, needing them to actually do the work, and then motivating them to actually do that. And again, it's because of the complexity of the system. It's not the component parts, it's actually the semantics or all the fancy words that they use around this. But it's, do I actually understand what these things mean? And I think that's also the role in the future of people like that. They will be the meaning makers for agentic systems, autonomous systems, and all these other things that we're doing and building.
Yeah, the meaning makers, the orchestrators. I think we have, a lot of orchestration roles kind of in the future that are going to be critical. So Pieter, help me move from here. So this is the current state. And let's take the example of people that we were talking about, leaders, where there's general awareness, but the first steps that they take towards trying to address it, are not likely the best first steps. So what do those look like, Pieter? Like when people engage and then they start trying to problem solve into the future state, what are the things that you see happen that you would say, not a good first step or not a step towards a true solution here? What are the mistakes?
I think they're in two kind of camps. The one camp is let's automate faster. So what can we do to just improve efficiencies, and without looking, and again, that's that situation of chopping down trees in a forest without making sure you're in the right forest. So we see a lot of effort going into how can we automate, how can we capture that knowledge and trying to get the machines to do that without kind of understanding, am I actually automating the right thing? And that creates very complex systems, as we said earlier. The other approach, or I think the other challenge that we see for these organizations is they're looking at emerging technologies and look at them more from a lens of, is this a quick fix? Is this something I can quickly use and throw it against the problem and see if it solves it? So if I can't get people to move faster, can I make some of the technology? So can I use co-pilots, for example? Can I use like AI? And can I just give my people some AI in a for sort of a co-pilot fashion, and see if that will address the problem. The challenge that we see, and especially with this last one, there's some research that came out. I think ChatGPT 5.2 was released kind of either this week or last week. These things happen so fast, I don't even know. But there's a evaluation metric on there, which is GDP. It's called GDP Eval, which is actually looking at can you replace human knowledge work, for example, marketing plans, spreadsheets, those kind of things. So it's not the math or those really smart things that they sometimes evaluate, but this is like normal office work. And GPT is now getting 71%, which means they are in 71% cases better than a human doing that work. So that's awesome. The challenge that we sit with is that research from MIT and others still show that 95% of the time AI doesn't contribute to the bottom line, that the AI projects fail. So looking at that emerging technology, so robotics, and there's all sorts of things that organizations look at, but the main one at this stage that we're seeing a lot of is, can I just put some smart tools in the hands of the people that are already stressed and already need or have the cognitive overload, and just give them more stuff to look at and more stuff to try and understand. So,
and even if it
that's
works,
kind of
right,
the two
Peter,
camps.
like even if it works, you could be contributing, if you're lucky, positively to productivity, but it's a different kind of productivity. It's office work productivity versus operational productivity, right? So it's not that, okay, let's say it works well. It's probably not going to contribute to the operational issues that we're talking about here. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the operating model comes in.
Yeah.
So in the first place, you need to look at how do you measure productivity.
Yeah.
So when you look at productivity, we used to do it in isolation. So I'd look at labor, I'd look at energy, I'd look at all these productivity measures, kind of isolated and try and optimize. And again, there are too many variables for us to as a human to try and optimize. So what we are seeing is that organizations and the ones who are leading this kind of change in operating model are looking at more from an overall holistic perspective. What are the overall productivity that I'm trying to influence? And in order to do that, I probably have to change the processes that I'm following. So my old digitized, because if you look at what many processes look like in organization now, they were the old paper processes that we managed to get onto a spreadsheet, which we managed then to get onto an iPad. So we've just digitalized, or we put it into a digital format, but we've not transformed we've not changed how the process actually works. The challenge that we now sit with is due to the complexity and the demands. It's not just complexity, but we have real-time demands for everything. We are so used to getting real-time stuff. 10 years ago, if I would get my supply chain update once a day to know where my stock is, that would be great. I now need it within a millisecond because I need to know if I'm going to, do I need to switch from another supplier? So the requirements have also changed to much more real time, much more making quick decisions fast and getting the right results. So that is also completely changed how we measure or use the processes, and then we measure still in classical ways. So we have daily reports, monthly reports, things like that, and it doesn't add up or it doesn't scale.
Yeah. So if I was going to, kind of summarize what you're saying, it sounds like when people are making the wrong steps towards this, it's probably, in pursuit of automation, right? Which includes digitalization as well, right, Peter? We're taking existing processes and digitizing components of it and feeling that, if I do that, I'm going to streamline my process for whatever, right? All of which is probably, questionable in terms of whether we're really creating a better system, a better operating system for the organization, right? And then this concept of, quick fixes that might be getting at, the wrong definition of productivity gains here that are really scalable. Yeah. So Peter, when we think about redesigning the operating model, like give me a hit list of the things that you think, need to be reconsidered, our productivity model and definition, how we think about decision latency going forward, and even process redesign. We've got to be careful, right, Peter? Because if we say to people, what you really need to do is redesign your processes, when I've seen that in many, many cases, we end up with, optimized versions of the current state, right? As opposed to reconsiderations of, process in new operating models. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, it's a challenging one. It's because the main challenge is actually um, not so much the process or the technology part, but it is that people part. So if we don't start with that, and kind of get our organizations ready to look at how do we address the change. So and because we also need to design that change with the people that are there, to be able to get to what these new processes or um, applications are. One of the things that we've seen successful organizations do is look at it from what we would call the perfect process perspective. So, what is the perfect process? Taking out people, machines, or anything, but what is the most optimized way? And if you look at control systems, which we use to run all these factories and plants and things like that, they've got something which we call an objective function. So if I can set up an objective, which is mathematically possible, so I can mathematically write out what the objective is that I'm trying to do, and then my personal value system could be implemented using utility functions. Now, I'm not going to go into the math, but these things have been around for a really long time, 250 years in terms of the economic studies around how to use utility, and Kahneman and others have been doing a great amount of work in that space. So looking at how do we then bring in kind of utility or measuring utility for that objective. So we've got an objective, but that's the perfect process. That objective consists of multiple measures that we have in it, and that measure, and again, I don't want to get into the math here, but that that measure would be some of the productivity measures that we have, for example, at a really high level. So it could be some of the energy consumption, our carbon footprint, the actual labor hours. And I also think we're measuring the wrong thing, because if we're measuring people labor hours, but we're automating everything, we've got a false metric for what we see as it should be in terms of what is the overall output versus all the inputs that go into it, all the energy consumption. If we're now going to use automation to do a lot of that, we'll see an increase in energy consumption, which should be part of the productivity calculation that we do, or the kind of. So if we look at how to redesign this, first of all, again, the organizations that we see do this well have this notion or concept of what is the perfect process. Let's remove all the things, whether it's people, flows, because the perfect process actually don't have a deterministic flow. If you go to if you apply for a home loan in a bank, you know exactly what's going to happen. There's all these, but the perfect process is actually, how can we get to the best decision very quickly with the least amount of resources? And my process and your process may differ, because there's already contextual information. There's already things that they know about you or me in terms of our home loan application that should determine that I have a process of one. So, and which parts needs to be done by a human in terms of human input, and which parts can be done by automation. So again, looking at that GDP val metrics, so they can get a 71% accuracy on office work, or in 71% percent of the time better than a human, at 11 times the pace and at 1% of the price. So should someone be filling in a form in a home loan when it can all be done automatically? But there are certain decisions in terms of the risk appetite of the organization. So looking at it in terms of that objective, we need to maximize how much we can lend at our risk profile. That is what we're seeing the smarter organizations are looking from an operations point of view, is how do I not look at my existing process and just see, can I make this home loan go even faster? Because you're not going to beat with humans 11%, 11 times the performance at 1% of the price anytime soon. So you need to figure how you bring that in, but then use the humans to understand and manage, for example, what that objective function is. What are the utilities? What are the, and how do we make the decisions and move the levers around that. So again, that's what we see the leading organizations do. Many of the others are just trying to run faster before they look at if they're running in the right direction.
So Pieter, in that context, how do digital twins play in those to-be operating models? Like, where's the real value there?
And that's an interesting question, because depending on who you ask, you'll get 1,000 definitions for digital twins. So if you look it up, you'll see there's so many. We're heavily involved with organizations like Digital Twin Consortium and others, which again there's fintech and other areas in it, but it's predominantly industrial focused. So, and the definition of a digital twin there is that it's a virtual representation of a physical entity or a process that is synchronized at a certain frequency and fidelity. So that's kind of the technical part. But the most important part is that it is informed by business outcomes and driven by data. And the objective is to improve decision making. Now, that all sounds very, very fancy. So what we've seen, the first generation of digital twins were basically just data models of a thing. So I have this thing and I've got a model that describes it. And there might be some real-time data in it, but typically it was my mirroring of what the kind of generation of intelligent digital twins, and we call them intelligent digital twins that we are seeing, is bringing in some of that AI and other capability to help with the decision support. So the benefit of the digital twin is, of an intelligent digital twin, is it can provide that semantic understanding. Systems are getting, as I said earlier, getting really complex. So to understand all the connections in something where there might be 1,000 moving parts, if you're looking at an oil or gas plant or a manufacturing operation in a beverage industry, a bottling plant, or with all the conveyor systems and all that, there are a huge number of different things that are connected. Systems are extremely complex. What you have with the intelligent digital twin is that semantic understanding of what all the parts. So if I look at this part, I can ask it in a graph, or depending on what your digital twin kind of platform underneath it is, what are the connections? What is this connected to? And if with ERPs and CRMs, we have a good data model, so we know name means name or company means company. In an industrial system, if I say to you 240 degrees, you have no idea. Even if I tell you temperature is 240 degrees, is it Celsius or is it Fahrenheit? And where in how is it? So digital twins give us that ability to create that connective tissue that actually helps us. So when we have these decisioning engines and what we call decision intelligence, and decision intelligence, we sort of also see in three buckets. There's the decision support, which I can just ask questions of a digital twin. There's decision augmentation, where the digital twin can actually, using generative AI and agents and co-pilots and that kind of thing, almost give me a prognosis or already tell me. So it helps me augment my decision. It helps me shape my decision. And the last one is decision automation, where you have autonomous systems that can actually make decisions on your behalf. The human just sits on the loop. So in the first one, the human is the loop. The human makes the decision. In the second one, the human is in the loop. So the human is in the first one, the human is the loop. The second one, human is in the loop, and the third one is the human is on the loop, where we now get that autonomous decisions. That's only made possible because we have digital twins that have semantic understanding of everything that it is connected to. So as we move along this continuum from the simple to the more advanced, we actually also need our underlying systems that give give us context and understanding to be moving along at the same pace.
I was going to ask you, a question. I think it's related to this exactly, Peter, and that is, what's the practical, considerations, the practical, path to move from, early stage support models to autonomy, in terms of organizational capability. So, what's the practical implications of that from an operations perspective to move from here to there?
Great question. We're seeing organizations. So there's been a lot of experimentation in this. So, and there's been a lot of older technology, especially built into ERP systems and systems of transaction, as Jeffrey Moore calls them, systems of transaction. There's been a lot of reporting capability and visibility and dashboards. We have more dashboards than, and again, if you're really interested in some views on dashboards, ask Michael Carroll. He'll give you some really interesting perspectives on them. But so if they don't add value, they're just entertainment. It's one of his one-liners. We've seen a lot of those emerge where organizations have built dashboards on top dashboards, and now they have really sophisticated dashboarding solutions. It requires someone to spend a lot of cognitive energy on understanding what those things are, but those systems are there. We then saw implementation of things like co-pilots. We were kind of bolt-ons, but they didn't really talk to that data, so I would now ask it. And people were wondering, why do we get wrong answers? Because I give it no context or it has no understanding. As a third thing. And now we're seeing organizations also looking at agentic systems and agents, and they're a separate thing again. These things, but organizations who get this right, and again, some of the leading operators in mining, oil and gas, energy utilities, and others are actually doing this, is looking at how can we build in a progressive way. So don't change the tooling. Start with the tooling that help go from a decision support system to a decision augmentation system, and look at the change management process for the humans. So don't change the tools. Choose the right tools in the first place. It's not necessarily your old legacy transactional system, because they're not built to get to kind of that third level. But if you have tools like that can do that, start with that familiar area, then move to the next one where we're augmenting, but it's augmenting with context. It is actually the same. It's the same underlying information. It's the same thing, but it now helps the operator understand where this comes from, and because they trust the previous part of it, this is a progression. Once they're at a level where they trust this level of progression with kind of the user interfaces, some of those processes, and not all of them, can then be fully autonomous. You can make them fully autonomous and just let the humans see when there are exceptions, or kind of peek in every now and again. The benefit, again, if you do it right, is they are running towards this objective function. So mathematically, so there's a thing I can measure every day, every second I can see, which is much harder with humans, by the way. Are they going towards the objective, or are they going away from the objective? And those are key things that we think are important in kind of that progression from simple to more advanced. And the things that organizations get wrong is set of tools for this, set of tools for this, and a set of. I get very excited when we talk about the subject. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the
I like that.
The progression.
I see the line of sight that you're saying, that if the foundation is built correctly in the augmentation model, you can see its logical progression to autonomy, because it really is just this take your hands off the wheel, idea that you get people comfortable with, right? So I can see how you can move from here to there. Go ahead, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was in San Francisco last week, and the number of Waymo cars on the road now is from a year ago is just, you cannot
Oh,
believe it.
yeah.
People are willing to get into the car.
There you go.
Absolutely. Every second car is now a Waymo. So you get into the car and there's no driver. But we were comfortable with the first models where we had autopilot, but we were still sitting in the chair. And that's that same change management
Yes.
process
Yes.
that needs to happen for us to adopt some of these other systems in the operations space.
Two big contexts that I feel like, run through the conversation from the beginning, which, and I have to tell you, the one I really love is to anchor on the humans first. I think that's great advice, Peter. It sounds like, an obvious or simple thing to do, but I think there's a lot of things that companies look at that is not the people. They go to a lot of places first that are not the people. And that seems, like just a pretty, basic center of focus to me in terms of what you're talking about. Go ahead. What would you say?
And I think the reason why technology is easier than to address the people problem.
Yeah.
For most organizations, I can go to a vendor, I can put out an RFP, I can read a research paper, I can ask one of the large consulting firms, and they will recommend, what we do with the tools. Actually changing internally in an organization is much harder. And we've seen over the, previous transformations that we have had, the different industrial revolutions, the electric motor, it took, I think, 40 years before it became the de facto standard in factories, and there was massive resistance to those. And now we don't even think about it. So this change that we're seeing is no different to what we've seen with all the previous changes. And again, the technology part is much easier for an organization to address than actually figuring out how to do it with people.
Well, it also, is a lot of what, boards worry about even now, even the boards, Peter, are we doing enough automation? Are we doing enough AI? Are we doing enough, and so, it's, there's not too often that you see the analogy of chasing the shiny object as being a reference to people as opposed to tech, right? Just saying. So, in the pursuit of shiny objects, that tends to be a technology idea. Can I just ask a question while we're on digital twins before I move? Just curious about your feeling about this. Since it goes into the human side of organizations, your thoughts on digital twins of organizations where we're trying to understand the decision-making patterns of the organization, including the cultural patterns. Is that in your mind, a possible idea to replicate?
I think we have to. In order to change the operating model, we need to create, and again, I'm a big supporter, coming from an engineering background, I'm a big supporter of how can I do this mathematically? How can I, and I know we're talking about people, but I do need to set up those objectives in the organization that I can mathematically monitor and set up that perfect process. So, and then the perfect process should have constituents of people and constituents of generative or agents or whatever the case might, whatever they're called. I think large parts of how organizations will run in the future, because of that fact, and especially with knowledge work, if you look at digital twins of organizations, a lot of it is around the operational processes, not just on the factory floor, but in the offices, in the supply chains, all of those other of the humans itself, as you say, the change management, HR processes, how we recruit, the health and everything of the people who work for us. Because we can now do that at a fraction of the price and much faster, that will happen. So those solutions will come into an organization. So in order to understand how to plug them in and not just let them happen and then sit with the consequences, we need to design them in. in order to design them in, we'll have to create a model of it so we can understand, where do I plug this part in and where do I still need that human intelligence, human decision making? Who's setting the strategic direction? Who's setting up those parameters for what we want the objectives to be? If our organization is going through a growth phase, how do we change the dials on the knobs? Those are human initiated and managed capabilities, and I think that's the job of the future as well, as we move into things churning out spreadsheets and payroll runs and things like that at a fraction of the price. So we have to create those digital twins of an organization. I think it's the harder one.
Yeah.
The digital twin of the jet engine, again, it's just a complex system. It's got many moving parts, but with a couple of engineers and some smarts, we can put it together. The digital twin of an organization, where you actually structure how the organization runs, I think it's a really interesting. And what we've done internally is we've created a digital twin of our strategy. So we have a
that's
strategy
interesting.
model that's really, it's surprising how informative it is in order to understand how all the levers. Now, it's actually built on things that we knew for a really long time. Kaplan and Norton gave us how to measure and monitor these things many, many years ago. But we've never put it, and we always just had it in a spreadsheet. It was never a living virtual representation updated at a specified frequency and fidelity. And it is informing decisions which we wouldn't have made, I would say, 2 years ago.
That's great. That's fun. It seems to me, just drill down a little bit, because the organizational context is a particular interest and focus of mine. It just seems that we should be able to express these organizational contexts as, relational patterns, Pieter, that continue, that persist. So how do we think about the dynamics of the organization, as patterns of behavior, decision-making, relational ideas, of how we interoperate as a team of people, right? How knowledge moves, how people influence, and the outcomes of that, et cetera. So I think that you can put math against that problem, Pieter. If you think
Absolutely.
about it in terms of relational dynamics, right?
And I wouldn't say it's the complete answer, but I think one of the areas where there's a lot of opportunity and it's not explored enough at the moment are things like causal analysis.
Yeah.
Where we're creating this graph of interactions. Now, whether they're machine interactions, whether they, we use it successfully to do root cause analysis on equipment failure. That's one use case. But in terms of fraud detection, all of that's been used very, very well on that. It's been actually used by FBI and others to track down suspects in terms of setting up causal connective tissue around how, and we've seen that with Twitter feeds and others, understanding connectivity inside a complex network. We should be doing that for our organizations as well, to understand how people connect and how these things that we expect them to do connect to them. So all these, how many systems are connected to me in a relational or that graph kind of structure. If you look at the social graph coming out of Facebook and all that, we should have that graph and there has been attempts to do some of that, but I think going forward, understanding, especially if we have this perfect process where a human is an actor in that, I need to have the same context as that other digital twin. I don't necessarily want the digital twin of my physical me. They don't need to know my blood pressure when I need to make certain decisions, or maybe they do. I don't know. But I do think in terms of how the connectedness inside the organization, and not just to other people, but other systems and environmental things, is part of what we need to look in the future, and that's where kind of the causal AI or causal analysis, I think, will play a big part.
It's interesting to see just generally, Peter, because, certainly there's some lessons to be learned when we think about how we understand those relationships with customers, but I really do think it's more fascinating when we think about it inside work, from an organizational and work perspective, because there's so many dynamics of complexity that influence, people, just everything from their structured relationship to the organization, their unstructured ideas, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's an area of study that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think the organizational mapping in the future will change as roles change, and we embed more of these. So we need to understand what those organizational changes need to be before we make them. In order to do that, we need to understand what causes what and why.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And I was going to say, when I brought up the point about, the human centricity of what you're talking about, also this concept of, trying to model the decision-making process, trying to model decisions, right, as opposed to modeling, process itself seems like a good way to step back off of, our tendency to want to fix the how, tweak the how, you know what I mean? Like we go after the how in a pretty, aggressive way. But when you come back off of it and you think about it from a decision-making perspective, for some reason, you just don't really tend to get caught up in that degree of, sequential hows, you know what I mean? That seems like a better problem-solving mindset, if you will. So I'll take that as a takeaway too. So Peter, we're kind of running to the end of our time here. And one of the things that I wanted to get on the table, and maybe I'll talk to my team here, maybe we can find a way to show this link in the podcast as well, is the article that you authored recently with Michael Carroll, mutual friend of both of ours, and a wonderful thought leader in the space. And I love this piece. It's an obit that looks at 2025, and what kind of proved itself to be, dead in 25, or we should let them, sunset as ideas in 25 versus lessons learned. So, it was less a negative idea and more of what was clarifying, if you will, what became clarifying, in 25 as a result of what didn't work, but also, sightings of what would work going forward. So can you just kind of recap that for me, Peter? Like, what do you think that article is trying to say in terms of the big takeaways? And what are we encouraging people to do as we stare down the new year?
So I'm a big supporter of what Mike has done and the work that he's working on in terms of advocating change, and again, he's got a strong emphasis on kind of the human aspect. What we've seen over the last year is that he's written a whole bunch of blog posts on LinkedIn articles. I recommend, I think it's 1 Degree. I can't remember the name off the top of my head now, but look it up. There's a whole bunch of articles. What Mike does really, and it's a chronological evolution of as we've seen these systems being deployed. What Mike does really well is he articulates kind of the challenges and the business value, but more from a philosophical point of view. And he's got great one-liners. So I took all the one-liners that came out of that, and I also write a lot. So the digital engineer, I've got a lot of. And again, it's this chronological evolution as we see these things emerge. And what I thought, and I've got a whole bunch of one-liners in there. So I solicited the help of Claude to kind of help me put this together into a narrative story, only using those one-liners. I don't create any new content, and see how and mine is more architectural. Mine is more about how do we solve this problem. Mike is more about here's the problem that we need to solve. And putting the two together actually turned out to be kind of eye-opening in kind of what we've done in the last year, where we've come to, the lessons that we've learned, and on both what works and what don't work. And now how do we take that into 2026 so that we stop experimenting and start implementing is really, and a lot of the lessons that both him and I have seen, and feedback in discussion with customers, partners, end users, vendors, all sorts of organizations, and you bring these reflections all into one, and that was the result. So that's the end of 2025, and we look forward to 2026.
It's a great piece. We'll try to give an article to it. And I think that what you're saying is you're referring to Mike Carroll's regular newsletter. You're right. It's called 1 Degree. Yeah. He writes a lot on 1 degree of separation, but I don't know it's 1 degree something. I'm not getting the name exactly right. And then your regular newsletter too, Peter. And say the name of that again, just so our folks have it.
It's The Digital Engineer.
Yeah. And, we didn't get to talk today too much about, how we think about, architecture and governance, really. I think two big topics that I feel like we didn't get to. But architecture being a lot of the glue that you see as, absent, in the problem solving and imagining the future state. So maybe we can get you back to talk about that. And I also was hoping that we could talk about, governance real time in our solutions as an embedded part of our solutions versus as the things we do last that probably needed to be the first step instead of the last
Absolutely.
step. Yeah.
With where we are heading, I think governance is the one thing that we actually also don't know what to do yet, and we need to sort that out pretty quickly. Otherwise, we are going to have disastrous results.
Do you know, just while I have you, do you know Jesper Logren? Are you familiar with Jesper? Yeah. So he'll be back on our show here, recording next week, and we'll be talking about agentic governance there and governance in the system. So we'll try to scoop up some of that then. So you have to keep an eye out for that.
That sounds awesome.
So Peter, I'm going to let us bring this thing to a close. Is there anything, any points that were aligned to the discussion? I can give you a couple of minutes if we missed anything, or do you feel like you got the big thoughts on the table before I set us down here?
No, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. I think it's really important that these conversations are had. I think there's a lot of excitement around what all these things can do. I'm personally excited. I think there's a great abundance ahead in terms of what the opportunities are. And I think there'll be more work for humans, not less work for humans. We've seen it through all the centuries, going from a farmer behind an ox to farmers now running large fleets. And we have a lot of value chains sitting around that. I think we're going to see the same, but it's really important that we design the organizations and look at the people aspects. Otherwise, it won't be successful. So thank you for starting these type of conversations, because I think they're really important to have, and not just, how great is the LLM.
Look, I love that. I appreciate you saying so. And, as a takeaway idea, I do think that if we could spend a little less energy worrying about whether there's a place for humans, as you said, in the future, and start figuring out how we get there, how we create human-centric solutions, and not spinning our wheels on the dire straits of what if we're wrong. I feel like we could lean more forward and bring all good ideas there, because I think we need a lot of good ideas. So I want to thank you, people like Michael Carroll. I love Mike, and it's a lot of time and effort that you all spend in sharing thought leadership, in taking the time to document it and getting it out, in addition to all the other work that you do, day jobs and otherwise. So I appreciate it. I'm a fan and a follower, and I hope we get you back again, Peter. It's really been my pleasure to have you here. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks. We'll see you again soon.